Shout out to BG. Welcome to Melanated Politics. I am Eric Clark.
And I am David Harper.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Go ahead and call back in at 323-815-4204, and let's go ahead and talk about it. Mr. Harper, I have to ask, brother, how's everything been going?
Just living in history. Everything's been going good family-wise, but again, living in history and want to be on point. Happy to be here on the show. I'm happy we can talk about the topics of the day, you can arguably say of the century, millennia, however you want to carry it. It's this right now what we're watching with the Derek Chauvin case on murdering George Floyd is historical. It's historical.
The history of law enforcement is the backdrop.
Mm-hmm.
The Republicans in the state of Georgia are doing everything they can right now to restrict the vote. So we'll take a dab off into that. But right now, let's allow this melanated professor to go ahead and break this down like some arithmetic regarding the George Floyd trial. Our dear brother, rest in peace.
Rest in power.
I agree and disagree, Brian, because the criminal justice system is always on trial. And even if Derek Chauvin ends up being convicted, it doesn't mean it's a good criminal justice system. It doesn't mean black people are treated fairly. We've seen so many different people, the killing of Tamir Rice, the killing of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman, Timothy Loman getting away with what he did. There have been so many instances of police officers and random white individuals shooting and killing black people and not facing any consequences, that in this particular instance, where the entire planet watched an execution, if that happens to put this man in jail, that doesn't mean the system is fine. It reminds me, to be honest, of Holdsclaw, the case that was in Oklahoma City a couple of years ago, where a police officer was accused of serially raping black women in the city. He was convicted because the crime was so egregious that the law couldn't allow him to get away with it because they would have no justification for anything else they did. That's what this is. This may be a bridge too far, but it doesn't mean that all the bridges that have been burned by this criminal justice system have been fixed with black America.
George Floyd had his trial on the street.
He sure did. It was a death penalty. Everything that we're watching with the okay, let me repeat myself. This is not George Floyd case. This is not about George Floyd being high. This is not about George Floyd having any drugs. This is not about George Floyd resisting arrests. This is the case of Derek Chauvin, because I've heard it pronounced different ways.
It don't even matter. He's a snake in the grass.
He's a snake in the grass. He's a killer. It's about him using brute force in killing a defenseless man. Now, keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, Derek Chauvin has been, I don't know if they use the word cited, but he's had complaints through his whole career as a police officer.
Between 15 and 19, I believe they only were able to present or accept like 2 or 3.
If that.
As
far as, abuse of power, had complaints on him. This case, if you've been watching it, I know a lot of people saying it triggers them. They can't watch it. It's too much. But this is a case not just about murder, but about trauma, but about guilt, and about class and poverty on the highest level. And it goes to the roots of the black community's relationship with law enforcement.
And you know what's crazy about people that say it's hard to watch it?
Mm-hmm.
It was hard to be George Floyd.
Impossible.
Put that on. Put that on your feet and see if it's too tight.
So a few things here. America has always had this relationship with black folks. Always. Right now, the difference between now and, let's say, Eric Gardner, who was strangled by a New York police officer for selling cigarettes, Lucy cigarettes, on the street, who said he couldn't breathe. The difference right now is that there's been so many videos, and the pandemic made people watch, and
Bet.
basically it forced America to deal with a reality they couldn't argue. But just like what the brother said on MSNBC, this is an extreme case. This is an extreme case. There's a ton of cases that aren't extreme where the person is either beat up, thrown in jail, whatever, that still doesn't deserve the type of treatment that they get. But because this man had died, the largest extreme of a man dying in front of you, that's where America's like, okay, that's enough. And you know this is the case because you have law enforcement, his police chief, Minneapolis police chief, police officers or police experts from different states in New York, and special investigators have all testified so far against his tactics. And really quick, ladies and gentlemen, in watching the case, one thing I didn't know about the case, well, there's several things, but I'll just say this is the one thing that really stood out to me. There was a firefighter, paramedic. I forget. I don't know if she's a firefighter. She's both, because if you're a firefighter, you know how to save a life. You have the paramedic skills. She's one of the people that watched the whole thing. MMA fighter Donald Williams, who does security, he watched the whole thing. Chris Martin, who I felt sorry for the young brother. I felt bad for the young brother because he's the one who said, "Hey, George Floyd had a counterfeit dollar bill," and all he kept thinking was to himself was like, if he didn't say anything, he would be alive. He has that weight on his shoulder, and as well as the older gentleman. I forget my man's name. I have it written down here. Darnell. Darnella Frazier was a teenage woman. Geneva Hansen was the paramedic, and Donald Williams, Chris Martin. There's an older gentleman that watched it as well. So you had several people watch it to let him know that what he was doing was wrong. It wasn't just, you had witnesses and a person who was a professional, and they wouldn't let her check on him. So there was the murder, there was the lack of humanity in this whole, not just in the killing of George Floyd, the lack of humanity into the people watching it, saying, I don't care what you say, I don't care, he's dying,
yes,
so
sir.
what? They dehumanized everybody there.
Facts.
And so,
Facts.
I mean, there's a lot to talk about in this case, but before I go on a tangent, because you know I can do that.
Do that.
What did you
do that?
What was your thoughts so far? What was I know there's a lot of takeaways. What was your biggest takeaway from the case so far?
Before we get to the case, allow me to just say this. Regarding that snake in the grass, ex-officer Derek, I say to myself, he would not have held a rescue dog down in the street like that for 9 minutes. That's off the top.
Mm-hmm.
And now we expect the Justice Department and the individuals the system to have a conscience. It doesn't work that way. Me personally, and this is just personal, I think he'll get off. I think he'll be found not guilty for whatever reason. I'm pretty sure we're going to expound on that. But nevertheless, I think they're going to let this man off. Because one thing that they do every 5, 10 years, every day, every month, is set an example. We're going to put these people in their place. And they've already been demonized in the media as being criminals, as being dope fiends and crackheads and runaway fathers and snatch a purse off your arm and choke you with the purse strings and whatever else you can imagine and put a beat behind that. But my point is this. Black lives don't matter in the United States of America. And that's what I got out of that initially.
Can I say one thing real quick? And one thing I do want to tell our audience is that back in the mid-2000s, early to mid-2000s, it was mid-2000s actually, it was the incredible, if you're not familiar with football, there was a quarterback, he's still alive, he's on Fox Sports News, by the name of Michael Vick. Michael Vick was the most electrifying quarterback, but he went to jail. He went to jail for dogfighting, and some dogs had died. And he went to jail.
And some snitching.
There was some snitching. He went to jail also because he bet. The main thing was racketeering. He bet on the dogs. But bottom line, PETA went after him. People were outraged that he
People for the ethical treatment of animals.
Yes, they went after him. We actually, they went after him. And basically, he did time. America has witnessed, I don't know how many police shootings or police murders or murder by police on black people. And America can justify it. And to piggyback on what you just said can justify that, but they can't justify Michael Vick doing what he did. But really quick, to piggyback on what you just said about him Chauvin getting off. That's a valid argument. You know, most of the time you and I go back and forth, but I can't necessarily disagree with you there because they're precedents with Trayvon Martin. If anybody's been watching the Trayvon Martin trial, the jury humanized. It was so deep watching it. That's another trial that I watched extremely close because my son was a year old when Trayvon died, and as a father, I remember his mother calling me. His mother called me immediately and said, "How can we protect our son from this happening?" And I had to tell her, it's going to be near impossible. But really quick, I don't want to go. I'm going down another.
Can I give you a quick story real fast?
Go ahead, please tell me.
I had a job on Century Boulevard, right? An investment job.
Century Boulevard's here in L.A. Go ahead.
My boy named Sam, he's white. Mm-hmm. He would pick me up, I would pick him up, we would ride to work, right? So one day we're just a little bit late. Sam, he's pushing it. I say, Sam, bro, slow it down, bro. This is LA, slow it down. Sam, he's pushing it. We get pulled over by the Hawthorne PD, right? I thought he was just gonna okay, lights, pull over, hands out of the window, how are you today, officer? Whatever. Sam says, "What the F did you pull me over for?" I said, "Oh my God, let me text my folks and say, hey,
this is last white friend.
nice knowing all of you, nice knowing all you people." So the cop, he looks at Sam, so he's like, "You were going too fast, license and insurance." So Sam, he takes a deep breath, like, oh, right? So Sam comes back, he gives Sam a speeding ticket, right? Sam takes the ticket, officer is still there. Sam takes the ticket, throws it at the window, and calls him an a-hole. Now, I'm waiting for the cop to snatch Sam out of the car because the only thing I'm thinking right now was what would have been the results had I done that, or have you done that, or anyone else that looks like you and I have done that, right? That guy goes back to his car. He sits there. I'm like, so Sam just takes off. I'm waiting for the cop to get behind us and pull us back over because of his performance. He just got off stage. Okay. I said, Sam, man, don't ever do that again when I'm in the car with you, bro. Don't ever do that again. You got a ticket, it balled it up and threw it out the window, called him a name, and just waited and pushed off.
Where's Sam now?
if Sam still has an investment job with another company and I'm doing something else. But my point is this: welcome to the United States of America.
I do feel that Chauvin may not do time. He may do a little bit of time. Jurors, and I don't know the makeup of this jury, and that's something I'm gonna have to research. When it came to Trayvon, they humanized George Zimmerman in such a way. But the difference in this case, let me say this: the difference in this case is that, frankly, you had enough law enforcement and white folks. White
I get that. I get that.
Saying he did.
I get that. But check this out, Mr. Harper.
Because that's what it takes.
Once the defense puts on their case, they're going to do their best to make George Floyd look like Darth Vader. And it's not going to happen. Let me explain why. We will not allow these people again to put the character of our brothers on trial when the perpetrators of these modern day lynchings are the ones that should be on trial. And like my boy Ice Cube always says, my skin is my sin right here in good old America. But you know what? You can't escape being pulled over. Melanated black judges, black off-duty cops.
Off-duty cops, yeah.
After the show, you can Google it, go on YouTube, different other social media platforms. I was just watching this morning, just out of respect for just a tad bit more researched. I wanted to see a lot of like off-duty police officers being pulled over by cops for different incidents. And when they pulled out their badge, say, look, dude, I'm like one of you guys. I mean, they receive more questions than someone with an expired license at the DMV. And it's not right. So you can't escape who you are and what you look like when you're driving. It doesn't matter if you're homeless. It doesn't matter if you live on 7th and Crocker. It doesn't matter if you're black and live in Beverly Hills. It doesn't matter if you're a construction worker, an electrician. Okay, it doesn't matter if you're a professional. It doesn't matter if you're a so-called hustler on the streets. If you have melanin interlocked into your pigmentation and is part of who you are, then the history shows it is what it is, and it's not what it's not. And we're just putting the information out there. It's only, this is only complaining if you are a mental and emotional and psychological ventriloquist for the people that are carrying these crimes out over and over and over again against our people. But as we said earlier, David, the history of law enforcement in America is very important because it's not really about the appetizers. We're talking about the main course. So let's go ahead and go to the main course and go ahead and put out there the history of law enforcement in America.
The most important numbers you will hear in this trial are 929. What happened in those 9 minutes and 29 seconds when Mr.
When you talk about the history of
law enforcement in America.
History of law enforcement in America goes far back, and it wasn't necessarily called, policing.
Well, by definition, they were called slave patrols.
Yeah.
But the prosecution and the trial of that snake in the grass, Derek
Chauvin, yeah, the prosecution is trying to make him out to be high, dangerous. The other thing the
We're
prosecution,
speaking regarding
defense. I'm sorry, the defense.
No,
Forgive me.
we're speaking about the prosecution
I
in their opening statements.
The opening statement.
I'll tell you. Well, let's go ahead and show the opening statements, and we'll talk about it after the video.
So going back to slave patrols real quick. Going back to slave patrols, because the statement from the prosecution. Was that basically there was nothing to show that George Floyd was resisting.
Okay.
There was nothing to show George Floyd deserved to die. And that's where the connection goes to history, goes to the history, goes to the past with slave patrols. Because there were slave codes, just like there was a black code.
Yes.
And that is still implemented now. Basically.
And there were sundown towns.
It was sundown towns and everything. But
and also they had vagrant laws. If you were unemployed, you're going straight to jail, or you will be sold.
Yes.
And you will be in a chain gang.
Absolutely. You had all of that.
But let's not keep everyone waiting. Check this out, y'all.
It seems really trite to say if you don't study history, you're doomed to repeat it. But nothing illustrates that more than the history of policing.
Policing, in one form or another, has existed since colonial days. In the form of night watches, local sheriffs, and militias. But it wasn't until the 19th century that northern cities such as Boston created modern police departments as we would recognize them today. These northern departments were not the first example of a uniformed, publicly funded law enforcement institution in America.
By the time the northern colonies were afoot in the 17th century, the idea of keeping track of the most valuable asset in the United States, that is, enslaved Africans, animated much of what we'd recognize today as law enforcement.
In the 1700s, the South saw the rise of official, salaried slave patrols, whose task was to capture, control, and brutalize enslaved people.
The initial acts that empower slave patrols and militias were acts that basically empowered all white people to surveil and punish all black people.
These slave patrols were required to serve a tour of duty, usually up to a year. Individuals were compensated for their time, but they were also penalized if they did not show up for their required service.
All white people, including white children, were expected to enforce so-called slave codes. These laws were meant to prevent enslaved people from organizing or rebelling. It was against the law, for example, for enslaved people to leave their plantations, gather without a white person present.
Question to the audience, also to you, Mr. Harper. Right now in 2021, if there are so many good cops, why do we still live in, why is there still systematic racism within the police departments and within law enforcement throughout this country if there's so many good cops? Because the evidence does not bear the rhetoric. Now, I'm taking it past the individual. I'll say it again. If there are so many good cops on the police force, why does systematic racism and modern day lynchings still exist to this day, i.e. George Floyd, Tamir Rice, Castro, Michael Brown,
okay, so
Breonna Taylor. Why? Why do we still live in this system?
Because America has never dealt with racism.
Okay.
It's never dealt.
No,
I mean, what
you're
I'm
right.
trying to say is
They've never been honest about it.
They never
been honest about it as well.
Okay, let me just say this.
Yes.
They have dealt with policies dealing with racism, i.e. Emancipation Proclamation.
Okay.
Hold on, real quick, and i.e. the Voting Rights Acts and Civil Rights Acts. But that policy, majority of people that put in those policies were killed, except for LBJ, who decided not to run. But I'm going on the tangent.
Okay.
Let me just say this. Let me just say this to answer your question. There are, and FYI, if you haven't watched the show, my mom was in law enforcement. I know there are good cops out there.
Yes.
And there's evil out there, so we need the police.
And I didn't say that they
I know
were
you.
not good.
I
didn't say that.
I know that. I'm just stating it. But we have not separated policing in the history of racism. We have not separated slave patrolling, and when it comes to our people, we haven't separated.
No, we have to teach it.
No. You can't. You can't teach. You can't teach.
I mean, the history of anything is important.
True. But teaching it, okay, when you say teaching,
Okay,
you're talking about teaching.
Let me give you an example.
Teaching it to present day police officers?
No,
or
let me
teaching
give you an example. Let me give you an example. One of the things I was fascinated about that video is the fact that what is the bottom line, the just straight up evidence, right, is that the slave patrollers in the i.e. so-called modern day police law enforcement, one of their main objectives and job descriptions were to protect the property of the wealthy, i.e. the white farmers, et cetera, et cetera. Why do you think brothers get pulled over when they leave the so-called ghetto? Why do you think a lot of brothers get pulled over in the new cars when they get because they are still protecting their property? That is the foundation, to protect their property. That's why a lot of brothers and sisters that are in law enforcement get pulled over themselves, because when they take that badge off and that starched up uniform off and they do their jobs and they're finished doing their jobs and they appear to be a quote unquote regular brother, okay, a civilian, they get treated like a brother that doesn't have law enforcement as a career. So we can put a hug around it and massage it up as far as the perception of all of this, because the foundation, it really means, it means a lot.
Let me say this, and I'm not trying to, basically say that teaching people isn't wrong. I think education is important, but unfortunately, I'm not a cynic. I'm a realist.
Yes.
I don't feel that. I feel like a majority of, I'm not gonna say majority, a good portion, because I don't know the number. I'll say a good portion of white people that know this number, that know that this is wrong, they don't care because they don't look at it this way. So to me, I don't think teaching, only thing that's gonna help this is policy. Is like, if you do something wrong, because I know you're gonna be racist. We can't police your racism. But if you are racist, when I say you can't police their emotion.
Well, I'll be man enough to say teaching was the wrong word.
Put them in jail.
Being straightforward, informing, peel the scab off. Stop dancing around it. As a nation, as a society, that's what needs to happen. If you went to, I know a few people that passed on from cancer. When you have cancer, when you go in there, they don't, and when it's time for them to tell you you have cancer, they don't say, what movie are you going to see this week? No, you have cancer, and you need to do A, B, C, or D. And then when you ask, how long will I live? 6 months to a year, 2 years, that's it. You talk about who's winning an Academy Award after that.
That's a great analogy.
When you go look for a job, you either have that job or you don't have that job.
That's a great analogy. You know why?
Go try to get a loan at the bank. Either have it or you don't. Do it on the internet. You'll get something in the mail. Matter of fact, it won't even be in the mail. Have bad credit, half an hour. You have a 400 credit rating.
Here's the thing. 400 credit rating. That's pretty bad. You got work to get a 400 credit rating. Here's the thing. That cancer analogy that you used was not a bad one. But you're seeing this in real time in our country because you can tell people, hey, racism is a cancer. You could tell them they got to know the history. But just like with coronavirus, people say that's fake news.
But bro, they got the good guy and the bad guy narrative going. The good guys are the cops, and the bad guys are the black criminals.
That narrative is America's narrative. But why? But this is why you have to change
Well, that
policy.
wouldn't be the narrative if this was somewhere else.
When South Africa did their Truth and Reconciliation,
Yes.
that was true pulling the scab.
I agree, bro. I agree.
But you know what?
I agree, bro.
But you know why? You know why that happened there?
The ANC, the African National Congress.
Part of the reason why that happened is because white folks there did a calculation saying this is a nation full of melanated people.
Yes.
We're outnumbered. It's either going to go one or two ways.
Yes.
Now, after the Voting Rights and Civil Rights Act, they threw us in jail. They pushed drugs into our communities. Of course, we ended up killing each other. They killed us. We were killing each other. A bunch of stuff.
Yes.
And even that couldn't hold us back. But there isn't a time right now. This isn't a moment right now where, hold up, let me rewind. Maybe there is a moment right now to where they feel desperate, because that's why you had the insurrection at the Capitol. That was pure desperation. And so, as we're going to talk about later on with the voting rights bill in Georgia, pure desperation. All of it is a loosening of power. And the question is going to be is how far is it going to go? The question is going to be, because you're not changing, and I have to quote, I know y'all going to trip out when I say this. When Hillary Clinton ran in 2016.
Yes, sir.
She said, I'm not trying to change hearts and minds. I'm trying to change policy, because she knows she can't change hearts and minds. When the video came out with Rodney King getting the black beat off of him, and majority of white people felt like the cops were in the right. You had a million batons. I don't know how many times the man was hit. He was right. When you had Trayvon Martin, you didn't see a video of Trayvon Martin, but he was a teenager getting killed by a grown man.
His skin was a sin.
They understood George Zimmerman's fear, and that justified him killing Trayvon Martin.
And that's why he had stated prior, right? He said, as a matter of fact, let me rewind that. He said, I'm tired of these black so-and-so, I'm paraphrasing, I'm tired of these black so-and-so running around here, breaking into stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So he already had it in his mind.
But it was relatable to the jury.
Okay.
Then really quick, and this is my last one. Over 74 million, 73.7, 74 million voted for a man in Donald Trump who openly
Was Andrew Jackson.
You heard him 1,000,001 times.
Yes.
Say there were good people on both sides.
Yes.
You heard 1,000,001. You heard him say to
the Proud Boys.
Proud Boys.
Yeah. Stand up and stand by.
But they voted for him. So the only way this is going to win, only way this is going to play out is if people stay on the ball, vote, pass HR1,
so if you have a relationship,
all of it.
if you have a relationship with someone, Mr. Harper,
yeah,
and you're against what they do, and you complain about what they do, and you haven't moved out yet. So what does it say about the people that voted for Trump?
No.
They're together.
They are together.
It's a movement.
It is definitely a movement.
It is the preservation
Yes.
of the Confederacy.
It's deeper than that. It's deeper than
And
that.
so far,
It's deeper than, that's part of it, but it's deeper than that.
yes. I mean, that's just more of a
That is definitely the what you call like the tagline. Yes, absolutely. But where it gets deeper, even though most of these people know they're not gonna get murdered, they not getting. It's not like people use that. I'm afraid of black men. They're not afraid of black men or black women killing them or anything like that. It's a fear of inferiority.
and I wasn't even
inferiority.
I was not even going to go there, but you know what? Hey, it is what it is.
Because you know why? And this is my last point.
Go ahead.
This is my last point. The reason why I use the word inferiority is because the best example I can give is Skip Gates.
Okay.
That police officer went to his house.
You mean Professor?
I'm sorry,
Gates,
Professor
the Harvard
Skip Gates.
professor, the Harvard professor.
The Harvard
That ended
professor.
drinking a beer with the cop after Obama said the police were acting stupidly.
But you know what?
He locked himself out. A neighbor called and said he's breaking in his own home.
It was
which pretty much happens all the time, according
and he
to
showed
social
his
media.
ID. He
In fact,
showed his ID.
yes.
He showed his ID to the cop, to the police officer, and said, "This is my house. This is my house." And that cop arrested him because he felt inferior, not because Skip Gates.
Okay.
Skip Gates is an
I'm
old
glad-
man with a
now I know
cane.
where I was going. Okay.
So I mean, that encompasses where America.
One of the books that I suggest our viewers read, and it is, and we've mentioned this before. It's called I don't recall the actual name of the author, but it's called 100 Years of Lynching. The reason why I brought that up is because it's all tied into the point that David and I are making right now. The reason why they are afraid, and they have been afraid, and that narrative has even been played out in the George Floyd trial. They think we're superhuman. That's a 400 year stereotype. You know, they think that black women don't feel pain.
Yeah.
They think if they crack you in the head, you won't feel it. Case in point, in 100 years of lynching, it's really about like just newspaper clipping after newspaper clipping of brothers that were lynched, burned, skinned, body parts cut off, sold as souvenirs, 15,000 people witnessing this. Okay, and when you look at George Floyd and you tie that into Rodney King, most of the time it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 50, 1,000, 5 million on one. If they weren't afraid, I'm just going to say it would be head up. If one cop, a righteous, law-abiding citizen himself, baseball teacher on the weekends, a basketball coach, do it by yourself. It always takes all these cops to apprehend one black dude. As far as, with respect to the laws of common sense, that's fear. Because if you weren't afraid, dude, I'm from here. They call 15 cop cars. They call the helicopter. If the battle round was still around, they would call that. They bring the feds in, okay? You got people hanging down buildings from ropes for a G-ride, stolen car. Come on, man. Are you serious?
And I do want to make one last point, too.
Go
ahead.
To our audience, please go get that. 100 Years of Lynchings. One of the best reads you ever will engage in, that goes right along with what we're talking about right now. Before we move back to the trial and how the prosecution introduced their evidence.
One thing, this last thing I was going to make my point on, in when I talked about them storming the Capitol and insurrection. That moment of the Trump era, you saw there was a group of people that voted for him because they wanted their money.
Yes.
They don't have necessarily the fear or the anxiety of black folks. It was just a financial decision. But that percentage dwarfs that fear. It dwarfs the whole, like, you know, America needs to go back to the Andrew Jackson days. Let's honor these the Confederate soldiers. Let's prop up the Proud Boys and other groups. You know, let's deflect and use Antifa as the real threat. That percentage is bigger than the percentage that's just betting their money.
Not only the certain polls like Fox News, when they poll their supporters and their viewers, it's over 50% of the people that were polled said that the people that engaged in the January 6th insurrections were Black Lives Matter infiltrators. They were Antifa. Mm-hmm. And they were aliens from Mars. And a lot of people believe that stuff because you know what? A form of brainwashing is to repeat the same thing over and over and over and over again before we move on. It's like hearing a song. You know how you hear a song for the first time, you're like, I really don't like that song. And then you hear it over and over and over again. I'll give you 2 weeks. You'll be moving and dancing to every single word. You will know every single word. But let's go ahead and get to the trial. Let's get back to the trial. Let's go ahead and listen to the prosecution state their case.
Was applying this excessive force to the body of Mr. George Floyd. And you will be able to hear Mr. Floyd saying, please, I can't breathe. Please, man, please.
Restraint. Hobble. I can't breathe. Okay. I can't breathe. I'll grab that. Once we get him. Jesus Christ. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Thank you. I can't breathe.
In this 9 minutes and 29 seconds, you will see that as Mr. Floyd is handcuffed there on the ground, he is verbalizing 27 times, you will hear. In the 4 minutes and 45 seconds, I can't breathe. Please, I can't breathe. You will see that Mr. Chauvin is kneeling on Mr. Floyd's neck and back. You will hear his final words when he says, I can't breathe. Before that time, you'll hear his voice get heavier. You will hear his words further apart. You will see that his respiration gets shallower and shallower and finally stops when he speaks his last words, I can't breathe. So we learn here that Mr. Floyd at some point is completely passed out. Mr. Chauvin continues on as he had, knee on the neck, knee on the back. You'll see he does not let up and he does not get up. For the remaining, as you can see, 3 minutes and 51 seconds. During this period of time, you will learn that Mr. Chauvin is told that they can't even find the pulse of Mr. Floyd. You will learn he's told that twice. They can't even find the pulse. You will learn about something in this case called an anoxic seizure. It is the body's automatic reflex.
George Floyd said he couldn't breathe 27 times. And if our audience had a chance to take a look at the both videos, both pictures, Derek Chauvin was kneeling on his neck like he was big game hunting. If you look at any hunter after they capture their prey, they stand over it like it's a trophy. And that's the way he was kneeling, like this is my game. So yeah, it's it speaks for itself. And we have a phone call.
Thank you for calling in Melanated Politics.
Hello, Eric. How you doing?
Hey, we're doing well. How about you, Kev?
All is well. All is well. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. A really great analysis as usual. And the thing that I have to say about this, which you guys covered really well in your discussion, is that number one, you look at this case literally on the face with Mr. Floyd, and it really should be a no-brainer. But the defense is trying to employ tactics, with character assassination. But the thing about it, the mechanics of his arrest supersedes any character flaws that he may have had, drug use or anything, because when he was first encountered, he wasn't left in a helpless state, talking about not being able to breathe, having a heart attack, or any of that stuff. And the thing about it is, the thing that the prosecution has on their side is that they really have experts that are indicating that this was fatal force and not a part of routine police practice as these people were trained. And to go further with what you guys said about why do police have this predisposed notion, well, you guys talked about the history of the police and the slave patrol, which I think is just a generational culture that has been passed down and is now being used in a contemporary context. But the thing about it, like you said, a lot of time agreement means complicit silence, but at a lot of time I think people are afraid of retribution against them for being honest about what they saw or witnessed from the inside as police. And I think from a legislative police reform standpoint, there needs to be a guarantee of non-retribution against people who are willing to talk in full and to catch these things from a symptomatic basis way before they transpire.
I agree with you, Eric. It's a lot to unpack. Really, we could do several shows just on this topic. And it's hard to encapsulate the history as well as present day. But the one thing we are saying is, things seem to be. I don't want to, think too far ahead. But it seems that, for lack of a better word, some type of change or retribution is coming. But I do agree with you wholeheartedly that people are afraid of what may happen to them if they speak openly and freely about what they experience and what they see. I know I remember years ago internal fights with the New York Police Department, the black law enforcement in the tri-state area, and the rank and file in New York and Jersey and everywhere, as far as police officers, black police officers standing up and saying, this is wrong. So there's definitely, it's been a long fight. It's been a very long and brutal fight for change to happen, and hopefully we'll see it here within this case.
A cultural change has to occur, and like you say, it's a numerous bunch of factors. We would take several shows to cover, but it's cultural, it's procedural, it's racial, it's logistical, it's the whole 9 yards, but it's going to take a combination of all those factors used in a comprehensive form to attain the goals that are needed in terms of police reform overall.
And also, give us your bottom line opinion on this trial moving forward before we let you go.
I think that the expert testimony of those who are usually not on the side of law will probably make this case a conviction. I don't think that this guy will be able to get away with this based on the technicality of the prosecution. When you have leading officers who train people, officers who have been on the beat in those situations, all testify explicitly that this is not what they were supposed to do. And the fact that the medical aid wasn't allowed to this person, it is obviously murder with a murderous intent. They didn't even let the guy up to even receive medical assistance. What do you call that?
You know what? when I watched the trial, so far what I've seen in the trial, I harken back to, and I know we talked about slave patrols, but I harken back to, you know, if a slave owner said, "Why'd you kill him?" You know, I wanted him back. That's you know, that's gonna cost me because he was a good worker.
He fixed my wagons.
He fixed my wagons. He plowed my fields. He did X, Y, and Z, and you know, the answer would be like, well, you know, he wouldn't listen. He put it on to himself. He put it on himself, and in the trial, that was Derek Chauvin. You would hear him on video talking to the older gentleman, Charles McMillan. He told the older gentleman, the older brother, that, hey, George Floyd was a big guy. I had to wrangle him down. The whole justification of why he did it.
Yeah.
And it's all of it is still around. It's still very much alive.
Right.
And yeah, so that's Kev. We always appreciate you calling.
Is there anything else you would like to add to that before we let you go?
I'm just hoping that justice runs its course and it represents a change and what is really been a historical problem. That's all.
Thank you for calling in, my brother.
Thanks, Kev.
Brother, continue to fight the good fight.
Thank you. Connected with the case of Derek Chauvin is, of course, the Georgia, and the reason why I say connection to Georgia voting rights bill is because it goes again to our relevancy in this country, and again, we could go on and on about the Derek Chauvin case, which I know we're going to be talking about again. And we're going to talk more about as well the Georgia voter suppression law, and kind of tying things in. What do you think about that? What do you think about the Georgia suppression law? I mean, what's your thoughts about it? Major League Baseball basically said no All-Star game, no Major League Baseball draft in Atlanta. They moved, and there's an uproar right now. But what is your thoughts when you first, you know?
What do I think about it? I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and let the country and the state of Georgia speak for themselves.
The bill also encourages in-precinct voting.
To Republicans, it is a series of perfectly sensible election reforms.
HB 531 is textbook voter suppression.
To Democrats, it is nonsensical. House Bill 531 is a 66-page bill that would create tighter restrictions on in-person voting, vote counting, and especially absentee balloting. It adds an ID requirement for absentee ballot requests. It limits the number of absentee ballot drop boxes. It also requires drop boxes to be kept indoors and inaccessible if the building is closed. And it allows only 2 weekend voting days, one of which can be a Sunday.
We know that forcing counties to choose between Saturday and Sunday voting is targeting Black voters who have used souls to the polls to cast their votes.
The bill also makes it a misdemeanor to give food or drink to any voter waiting in line within 150 feet of a precinct. Critics said the bill was written just to give cover to Republicans smarting from Donald Trump's loss of Georgia in November. Republicans framed it only as reform.
For those who want to keep hollering about suppression, let me tell you something, this is a politicalized issue, folks. It's about keeping people whipped up into a frenzy. That's the political game. But it's time to put it to bed, folks.
So the House passed the bill on a party line vote, sends it to the Senate, and the Senate already has its own version of what it calls election reforms in the stew as well. Meantime, Democrats, even though it's not law yet, are already talking about challenging it in court. Back to you.
Okay, bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, this bill is the Stop the Steal bill. That's basically what it is. It's
Stop the Steal.
It's a Stop the Steal bill. This past election, the 2020 presidential election, had the largest turnout in history. And from all accounts, it was the most secure election that we had. And not only that, just to kind of put a pin or just laying it out there was some voter fraud, but not nearly enough to turn the election. So I'm gonna give you the facts. Yes, is there voter fraud? Yes, I'm telling the truth. There's voter fraud, but it's very, 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 very small.
Can I get 3 more varies? Can I get 3 more varies?
And speaking on this bill, we have to give our condolences to a gentleman who passed away.
Yes.
Part of the Congressional Black Caucus who served Florida 23 and Florida 20, Al Hastings. He passed away this past April 6th from pancreatic cancer. He was a fighter for civil rights. He was a fighter for fairness, and he's going to be missed. When you think about folks in our Congress, in our politics that are going to support and fight situations in bills like the Georgia law or the Texas law, voting law, that's voting bills about to come out. He was one of those guys who was in the fight and was in it to win it all the way. And I just want to give a condolence. We want to give our condolences to his family, the Hastings family, and I know he's going to be missed in Florida.
This was rocking. This was fun.
This was needed. We're going to be talking more about Derek Chauvin. I know we're going to be talking more about the voter bill. This stuff isn't going away, and it's going to be it's going to be right here. The revolution will be televised here on Moore's Media Studios with Melanated Politics, and we're going to keep it going.
Our tongue is our gun, and our wisdom is our ammunition. Like our dear brother, the late Marcus Garvey, said, we can do it. Peace. We're out.